Hello and welcome to my YouTube. This YouTube is remembering the year 1954. I was 10 years old and in the fourth grade in 1954. My classroom was in a metal Quonset hut, thanks to the baby boom. My school was a small town and they couldn't afford to build a new school building, and suddenly there were a lot more children coming into the school. And why was that? Let me show you. Here's a chart showing the birth rate, and in here is 1929 to 1939. This was during the Depression, so the birth rate plummeted during the Depression. The end of World War II is right about here. Now notice this sudden huge spike. This is the baby boomers. And because of the huge increase in the birth rate in America, school districts were desperately trying to add on classrooms and build new schools. And why was there such a big spike? Because 16 million soldiers came home. Dwight David Eisenhower was president of the United States back then. Winston cigarettes were introduced that year, and their motto was, "Winston tastes good, like a cigarette should." Rolaids, the antacid, was introduced. Trix cereal was introduced that year. Burger King opened their first restaurant in Jacksonville, Florida. Regency TR1. This was the first commercially successful transistor radio, and it started selling that year. Tater tots were introduced that year. 3 Coins in the Fountain won the Oscar for the Best Original Song. On the Waterfront won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1964. There was a shooting in the United States House of Representatives. 4 Puerto Rican terrorists came in and somehow they got guns into the U.S. Capitol. And they were up here in the visitors section, and they ended up shooting and wounding 5 congressmen. Bill Haley and his Comets recorded "Rock Around the Clock." Now, technically, this wasn't the first rock and roll song, but this was the first rock and roll song to hit #1 on the Billboard popularity charts. Boeing introduced their famous 707, and I have flown on this plane many times over the decades. Elvis Presley releases his very first record, "That's All Right," on the Sun label. The Supreme Court issues the Brown versus the Board of Education ruling, which ended segregation in public schools in America. Notice there are no women on the court back then. That would have been unthinkable. The very first issue of Sports Illustrated came out that year. The Tonight Show started, and the host was Steve Allen. The very first drip brew coffee maker was introduced in Germany, but it quickly made its way to America. The Marshmallow Peeps were introduced that year. These were always very popular at Easter time. Betty Crocker's Good and Easy Cookbook was published that year. Senator Joseph McCarthy is condemned by the U.S. Senate. He was infamous for holding these hearings, anti-communist, and he had a blacklist. And finally, the Senate got fed up, and they condemned him with these words: "Conduct that tends to bring the Senate into dishonor and disrespect." Marilyn Monroe marries Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player. Big news. Big story. The first polio vaccine shots are given to hundreds of thousands of children, including me. The average annual salary for a man was $2,300 back then. On average, a new car cost about $1,950. This is a '54 Ford. A new home would cost somewhere around $10,250. A gallon of gas cost 27 cents. Who was born in 1954? You'll recognize these people. The actor Denzel Washington. The actor and comedian Jerry Seinfeld. Oprah Winfrey was born that year. John Travolta, the actor, and the actor Dennis Quaid. What were the 5 most popular TV shows in 1954? Number 1, I Love Lucy. Number 2, The Jackie Gleason Show. This was a comedy variety show. One of the skits was so popular that they spun it off as the show The Honeymooners. But it started off as just one of the skits on The Jackie Gleason Show. Number 3, Dragnet. Jack Webb, who started on radio. Number 4, Groucho Marx, You Bet Your Life. This was a quiz show, but mostly you watched it because Groucho Marx was funny. He would come up with all kinds of funny things with the contestants. Toast of the Town with Ed Sullivan. Now here's a little quiz for you. Who is this lady? All you old people will know this one maybe. Who is he shaking hands with? The answer is, her name was Margaret Truman. And if that name sounds familiar, it should, because she was the daughter of President Harry Truman at the time. Or I'm sorry, not at the time. He was the former president. And back when she was a singer, one of the music critics for the Washington Post wrote a scathing review of her. He said she wasn't very good and she sang off tune. Well, when you're the former president, or you are the president, his response to the criticism of his daughter went like this, and I quote, "Someday I hope to meet you. When that happens, you'll need a new nose, a lot of beefsteak for black eyes, and perhaps a supporter below." The words "under God" were added to the Pledge of Allegiance that year. The wiffle ball was introduced, along with the wiffle bat. And interestingly enough, the bat was a wooden bat. It was just skinny. The first Godzilla movie premieres in Tokyo. It was a Japanese movie. And what did Godzilla destroy? He destroyed Tokyo. Now, back then they didn't have computer animation, and the Japanese didn't have the talent or the wherewithal to do stop motion animation. So Godzilla was played by a guy in a 200-pound Godzilla costume. Rogers Bannister in England runs the very first sub 4-minute mile. This was big news all over the world, and he did it in 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. So he beat the 4-minute mile mark by 0.6 of a second. The very first Hyatt Hotel opens in Los Angeles. It was also unique because this was the first hotel built on airport property. The first TV dinner is introduced by Swanson. Had a lot of those in my day. What were the top 5 grossing movies of 1954? Which ones made the most money? And here they are. Number 1, White Christmas, starring Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye, Rosemary Clooney, and a lady by the name of Vera Ellen. Don't remember her, but certainly remember the other 3. Number 2, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, with Kirk Douglas, James Mason, Paul Lucas, and Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was a real good, played a lot of bad guys in his day. The next was Demetrius and the Gladiators. This was supposedly a continuation of The Robe. The Robe was a hugely successful movie, starring Victor Mature and Susan Hayward. Also a miner who became famous, Anne Bancroft. Oh, I like this one. Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock suspense. James Stewart and Grace Kelly. He's confined to a wheelchair and he's looking out the window and he sees this neighbor doing something suspicious. Well, it turns out the neighbor's murdered his wife, chopped her up, and buried her in the garden. And who played the neighbor? This guy. Some of you may recognize him immediately. That's Raymond Burr. And here in the credits, Raymond Burr, he played the villain. For you youngsters, Raymond Burr ended up playing Perry Mason on TV from 1957 to 66. He was the lawyer who never lost. But he made over 90 movies before he ever ended up on television. And Rear Window was one of them. Oh, I love this movie. The Caine Mutiny, starring Humphrey Bogart, Jose Ferrer, Van Johnson, and Fred McMurray, biggie names. The captain is court-martialed, and he had a habit of playing with these ball bearings. He would roll them around in his hand, and that's probably one of the most famous scenes in the movie is during his testimony, he's sitting there clinking and clicking these ball bearings, and he just looks nuts. He looks nuts. What were the 5 most popular singers in 1954? Number 1, Rosemary Clooney. Big hit, This Old House, Hey There, Mambo Italiano. Number 2, Frankie Lane, Blowing Wind, Grenada, Someday, My Friend, and Rain, Rain, Rain were his hits. Perry Como, Papa Loves Mambo, and Home for the Holidays, a Christmas song, made it into the top, put him up there. Doris Day, also well-known actress. Eddie Fisher. Now, let me tell you my little story about Eddie Fisher. Eddie Fisher married Debbie Reynolds. Perfect marriage. And I was infatuated with Debbie Reynolds. I'm a 10-year-old boy, and I just think she's the most beautiful thing. And, I was thrilled that Debbie has this famous, handsome husband. Perfect marriage. Well, after a few years, Eddie Fisher divorced Debbie Reynolds and married that old Elizabeth Taylor. Yeah, an old black-haired woman. I was furious. How could he do that to the cute, beautiful little Debbie Reynolds? And he broke her heart and divorced her. So that was it. I removed him from my life. I scratched him out of my life. No more Eddie Fisher music for me. What were the top 5 songs of 1954? Kitty Callan had the #1 song, Little Things Mean a Lot. Unfortunately, a year later, she literally lost her voice while performing in New York City. And then she had a nervous breakdown. This was kind of the height of her career. She'd been singing since the 1930s. Perry Como, Wanted was the #2 song that year. Hey There, Rosemary Clooney had the #1 song, or #3 song, sorry. #4, the Crew Cuts, Shaboom Shaboom, yada da 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 boom shaboom, came in #4. And Joe Stafford had the #5 song, Make Love to Me. And now I'd like to play 3 of my favorite songs from 1954. This old house once knew his children. This old house once knew his wife. This old house was home and comfort as they fought the storms of life. This old house once rang with laughter. This old house heard many shouts. Now he trembles in the darkness when the lightning walks about. Ain't gonna need this house no longer. Ain't gonna need this house no more. Ain't got time to fix the shingles. Ain't got time to fix the floors. Ain't got time to oil the hinges, nor to win no window pane. Ain't gonna need this house no longer. He's getting ready to meet his fate. This old house is a-getting shaky. This old house is a-getting old. This old house lets in the rain. This old house lets in the cold. On his knees are getting chilly, but he feels no fear or pain, 'cause he seeks a new tomorrow through a golden window pane. Ain't gonna need this house no longer. Ain't gonna need this house no more. Ain't got time to fix the shingles. Ain't got time to fix the floor. Ain't got time to oil the hinges, nor to mend no window pane. Ain't gonna need
need this house no longer. He's getting ready to meet his fate. This old house is afraid of thunder. This old house is afraid of storms. This old house just groans and trembles when the night wind flings its arms. This old house is a-getting feeble. This old house is a-needing paint. Just like him, it's tuckered out, ready to meet his fate. Ain't a gonna need this house no longer. Ain't a gonna need this house no more. Ain't got time to fix the shingles. Ain't got time to fix the floors. Ain't got time to oil the hinges, nor to mend no window pane. Ain't a gonna need this house no longer. He's a-getting ready to meet his fate. Ain't a gonna need this house no longer. He's a-getting ready to meet his fate. Good night, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. Good night, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. I hate to leave you, but I really must say good night, sweetheart, good night. Good night, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. Good night, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. I hate to leave you, but I really must say good night, sweetheart, good night. Good night, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. Good night, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. I hate to leave you, but I really must say good night, sweetheart, good night. Good night, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. Good night, sweetheart, well, it's time to go. I hate to leave you, but I really must say good night, sweetheart, good night. I hate to leave you, but I really must say good night, sweetheart, good night.